How are your girls?
Stacy's good. Maggie, she's just gotten so angry. I don't know any of her new friends. And we found out she's gotten into drugs. It's probably just a phase.
Most people don't know what to say about drugs.
Yeah, she'll outgrow it.
But we do. Visit us at drugfree.org.
Today, Volkswagen admitted that it rigged 11 million cars to defraud pollution tests. The U.S. Justice Department is looking into criminal charges. Here's more from Chris Van Cleve.
And in my German words, we have totally screwed up.
Volkswagen's U.S. CEO Michael Horn said what's become painfully clear for the world's largest automaker.
Our company was dishonest with the EPA and the California Air Resources Board, and with all of you.
The 11 million cars with software to cheat U.S. emission standards are diesel versions of 5 popular models built between 2009 and 2015. The company says it is moving full speed towards finding a fix and has set aside more than $7 billion to deal with the problem. That's about half a year's profits, but it's facing up to $18 billion in possible fines. The software senses when a vehicle is undergoing emissions tests and reduces the pollutants being released. But when driven, the EPA found emissions 10 to 40 times above acceptable levels.
The damage to Volkswagen is going to last for years.
Clarence Ditlow runs the Center for Auto Safety.
This was so clearly a deliberate act by executives at Volkswagen that there needs to be criminal penalties.
Volkswagen's CEO apologized again today in Germany. Scott, he could learn his fate tomorrow at a board meeting.
Chris, thanks very much. This is not a safety issue. The cars won't crash, but there is a danger to health. Here's Ben Tracy.
This is what Los Angeles looked like in the 1980s. Beachgoers and buildings shrouded in smog. Nearly 30 years later, you can see the impact of the toughest emission standards in the country.
So how long will this test take?
Diesel emissions, the kind Volkswagen now admits covering up during tests, are the largest contributor to airborne cancer risk in California. That's why the state requires cleaner burning gasoline and strict controls on diesel vehicles.
This is an issue of public health.
Stan Young is with California's Air Resources Board. Because of its strict regulations, between 1990 and 2012, the amount of diesel particles in the air dropped 68% in California. That helped lower the overall cancer risk from toxic air pollution by 76%. Young says VW's admission proves why testing is so important.
Without this kind of really decisive testing, we wouldn't be able to find when they're cheating and when something is broken.
California regulators are now working with Volkswagen to recall all of the vehicles that no longer meet California's requirements. Scott, they estimate that could be up to 60,000 vehicles.
Ben, thank you. Today, the European Union approved a quota system for relocating 120,000 refugees across the continent. It's just a fraction, though, of those who've surged into Europe to escape war and poverty, many of them from Syria. Holly Williams has been investigating this crisis, and she's discovered refugee children forced into labor in Turkey.
In a basement in Istanbul, a textile factory hums with activity, staffed almost entirely with Syrian children. Filming with a hidden camera, we found workshop after workshop in Turkey's biggest city, all using Syrian refugees, some as young as 10. This boy said he came from war-torn Aleppo. He's now safe from barrel bombs and terrorists, but not from exploitation. Syria's nightmarish civil war has driven millions of people from their homes, including more than 2 million who fled across the border to Turkey. But poverty has compelled many refugee families to send their children to work, turning their sons and daughters into breadwinners. One of them is Hussein Omar, who fled Syria last year after his neighborhood was shelled. At 10 years old, he told us he works a 12-hour day, sometimes 6 days a week, selling vegetables.
Do you know how to read and write?
No, he told us. He only had 1 year of school before the war began.
Would you like to learn how to read and write?
Yes.
But as long as Syria's civil war rages, the chances of Hussein ever getting an education are slim. We filmed Hussein with our hidden camera at work in the market. His wages of $25 a week help buy bread for his family of 9. A little boy toiling long hours for low pay and a bleak future. Like so many other boys and girls, still victims of a war, they came here to escape.
Many of the Syrians now making their way to Europe first sought refuge here in Turkey, in some cases staying for several years. But Scott, with little hope of a better life for their children here, it's no wonder that tens of thousands of Syrian refugees have paid human smugglers to get them to Europe.
Holly Williams with remarkable investigative reporting for us tonight. Holly, thanks. A CEO tells us why he jacked up drug prices 5,000%. And we'll take a closer look at the Pope's ride when the CBS Evening News continues.
Attention Medicare beneficiaries. Health reform has added significant new benefits to Medicare plans. If you have Medicare Part A, Part B, Part D, or any Medicare Advantage plan, you now get benefits with no copays, no deductibles, and can get dental, vision, and prescription coverage included. Call the Medicare Health Reform Helpline now to make sure you have all the benefits you're entitled to. Call the Medicare Health Reform Helpline now to update your plan.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jason Buchwald. The cost of health insurance and the denial of coverage because of pre-existing conditions has been a serious problem in America. But now the law has changed. Healthcare reform is now available. So many people do not take advantage of the benefits offered to them by healthcare reform because they don't call. Call now.
The Medicare Health Reform Helpline is now accepting calls. Don't miss the deadline. Call the Medicare Health Reform Helpline.
Call 800-518-1042. That's 800-518-1042. 800-518-1042.
Some say great mashed potatoes make the meal. Hungry Jack says Italian herb chicken with garlic parmesan mashed potatoes makes the meal. New perfect pairing, seasoning, and potatoes. Only from Hungry Jack.
If you're the band Europe, you love a final countdown. It's what you do. If you want to save 15% or more on car insurance, you switch to Geico. It's what you do.
You get used to the funk in your man cave. You think it smells fine, but your guests smell this. Febreze Fabric Refresher eliminates all the odors you've gone nose blind to. Break out the Febreze and breathe happy.
On any given day, anything can happen. That's the beauty of morning television.
This is your eye-opener to this day.
CBS This Morning, weekdays.
Tonight, the head of a drug company who's accused of gouging patients says he should be thanked. In one instance, he raised the price of a drug used by AIDS patients from $13.50 a pill to $750. Don Daler asked him why.
32-year-old former hedge fund manager Martin Shkreli thought the drug Daraprim was underpriced. The medication is used to treat a disease that can be fatal to those with a suppressed immune system, such as cancer and HIV patients. Last year, fewer than 9,000 prescriptions were written for the pills. Shkreli's company, Turing Pharmaceuticals, bought Daraprim this year and immediately jacked the price up more than 5,000%.
And if there's a company that was selling an Aston Martin at the price of a bicycle, and we buy that company, and we ask to charge Toyota prices, I don't think that should be a crime.
And it's not. The FDA has no authority over drug prices. In February, Valiant Pharmaceuticals raised prices for two newly purchased heart drugs, Isoprel and Nitropress, 212 and 525%. 2 years ago, Horizon Pharma increased the price of Vimovo pain tablets 597%. In fact, since 2008, non-generic prescription drug prices have soared by 127%.
But right now, it's a free market, and it's up to each company to decide what price is proper.
Shkreli says his company will use the profits from Daraprim to develop other medicines.
There's no doubt I'm a capitalist. I'm trying to create a big drug company, a successful drug company, a profitable drug company.
You see how greedy this move looks.
Yeah, I could see how it looks greedy, but I think there's a lot of altruistic properties to it.
Altruistic?
Absolutely.
In what way?
With these new profits, we can spend all of that upside on these patients who sorely need a new drug, in my opinion.
Both leading Democratic presidential contenders are proposing federal rules regulating how prescription drugs are priced and marketed. But Scott, apparently bowing to all the outrage, late today, Shkreli made a statement that he would, in fact, be open to lowering the drug price.
Don Daler with the story and the interview. Don, thanks very much. How do American Catholics feel about their Pope? We ask them when we come back.
CBS News, honored with 10 Edward R. Murrow Awards, more than any other news organization. CBS News, original reporting.
There are 80 million Catholics in America, and Francis has won most of them over. In a CBS News New York Times poll, 63% have a favorable opinion of him. Here's Dean Reynolds.
When family counselor Victoria Fleming attends Mass on Sunday in a Chicago suburb, she is excited about her faith and especially her Pope.
He is actually living the sort of faithful and humble life that he's called to.
She cheers each Francis pronouncement, from climate change to income inequality, and prays for more.
Where is he leading the church to?
I think he's actually leading us back. I think he's leading us back to where Jesus left off.
Fleming is among the 53% of American Catholics who say the church is in touch with their needs, and the 79% who approve of its direction.
I'm quite content to have that direction be brought in line with the ministry of Jesus.
Marianne Hackett, president of Catholic Citizens of Illinois, does not share Fleming's enthusiasm.
Are you uncomfortable with this Pope?
Yes. It's sort of like anxious, not knowing exactly what he's going to do next.
Well, is he doing damage?
Well, we'll see, won't we?
Hackett is among the 9% of American Catholics who disapprove of the Pope's direction.
What do you think of his pronouncements on climate change, for example?
I think he's wrong.
And Hackett says the Pope leaves the impression that unshakable doctrine is up for discussion.
Are you surprised that 63% of Catholics say the condition of the church in the United States is excellent or good?
Yes, I don't think they know what they're talking about. I think the condition of the church in the United States is very iffy, very iffy.
Among the strongest supporters of the Argentine Pope are American Hispanics. And Scott, in heavily Latino Los Angeles, the Archbishop says that last year there were more infant baptisms than in New York, Washington, Philadelphia, and Chicago combined.
Dean Reynolds reporting for us tonight. Dean, thank you. Riding along in the Pope-mobile next.
This portion of the CBS Evening News is sponsored by Cialis.
More real news every morning.
Samantha Power is the United States ambassador to the United Nations. Good morning.
Do you think the U.S. can trust President Putin at this point?
CBS This Morning.
Babies aren't fully developed until at least 39 weeks. If your pregnancy is healthy, wait for labor to begin on its own. A healthy baby is worth the wait.
Travel is part of the American way of life.
When we're on vacation, we keep an eye out for anything that looks out of place.
Miss your bag.
When we travel from city to city, we pay attention to our surroundings.
Everyone plays a role in keeping our community safe.
Whether you're traveling for business or pleasure, be aware of your surroundings. If you see something suspicious, say something to local authorities.
Be the voice for those who have no voice. Visit worldwildlife.org.
The Pope began his U.S. visit not in a fancy limo, but a modest Fiat. He is driven to humility. Bill Plant has a look now at how popes travel.
For centuries, popes were carried on the shoulders of the faithful. Pope Paul VI complained that the swaying motion made him seasick. It was Pius XI who added motorized vehicles to the papal fleet. In 1930, Mercedes-Benz gave him a converted limousine. A Lincoln Continental was used for the first papal visit to the U.S. in 1965. But after the assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II in 1981, everything changed. Andreas Widmer was a member of the Swiss Guard, which protects the Pope.
The immediate reaction was to close. They put the armored vehicle class around the Pope-mobile and everything.
Pope John Paul didn't care for the name Pope-mobile. He thought it undignified. But soon, wherever the Pope went, you'd find a Pope-mobile. And popes have often chafed at the security measures. Pope Francis has called the Pope-mobile a glass sardine can.
The security for the Pope needs to optimize his security while not hindering his ministry. If you don't let the Pope do his ministry, he won't be he's not the Pope anymore.
So the Pope-mobile Francis will use on this trip is much like the one he used in Ecuador earlier this year, a specially built Jeep Wrangler, open and unarmored. Now, that might keep security officials up at night, but not the Pope. He told an interviewer, "It's true that anything could happen," but he added, "Let's face it, at my age, I don't have much to lose." Bill Plant, CBS News, Washington.
That's the CBS Overnight News for this Wednesday. For some of you, the news continues. For others, check back with us a little later for the morning news and CBS This Morning. From the Broadcast Center in New York City, I'm Scott Pelley.
CBS News, original reporting.
This is the CBS Overnight News.
And welcome to the CBS Overnight News, a look at the people and events shaping your world. I'm Don Dahler. Tonight, Pope Francis in America. The pontiff arrived yesterday and has a busy day ahead of him. He'll meet with President Obama at the White House before taking part in a papal parade along National Mall. Francis will have midday prayers with American bishops at St. Matthew's Cathedral, and finally a mass at the National Basilica to elevate a Spanish missionary, Junipero Serra, to sainthood. CBS News is following Pope Francis every step of the way. Here's some of our coverage.
President taking his first step in his life onto the soil of the United States. The crowd chanting Francisco, Pope being introduced to the president's daughters. The president's mother-in-law. And the vice president, of course. We should note that Vice President Biden is the first Catholic vice president of the United States. We should mention, by the way, we're not expecting any remarks here at Joint Base Andrews, either from the president or the Pope. Pope has had a long couple of days, and once he leaves Andrews, after greeting everyone, he's going to be heading into Washington, and he will be resting for the rest of the day and the rest of the evening before the rest of his busy schedule. Alan Pizzi has just come off the plane behind the Pope. And Alan, what are you seeing?
Well, Scott, what I'm seeing is what you're seeing, but I'm seeing something that you're not, in that I've covered a couple of dozen of these arrivals of the Pope in countries, and this is completely different in that there are more press and there are fewer people than generally show up in free countries, at least. In some of the more restricted ones, there are less people. But what's interesting to me most of all is what you mentioned, that there's no welcoming speech. Invariably, when we get off the papal plane, there's a lectern, a microphone, a podium, sometimes a covered area, and the Pope has to make a speech, and the head of state makes a speech. And interestingly, when Raul Castro met the Pope when he arrived on Saturday in Havana, he made a very long speech, much longer than the Pope's. And in that speech, he basically tried to equate the ideals of the revolution, of the Cuban Revolution, with the ideals of Christianity, and kind of gaining a little credence, if you will, from the Pope, because the Cubans are kind of cooperating with the church because they need the church for a number of reasons, not least of them being that the church helps them put in changes that they can slide off under the guise of the church doing it instead of them knuckling under. So it's a little different than the other receptions, and I must say it's a little more orderly than some of the ones I've seen, Scott.
Chip Reed is on the receiving end, if you will, of the Pope. He's there at the residence where the Pope will be staying tonight. Chip?
Well, Scott, I'm going to reverse roles here. I actually have a question for you. You can see the children behind me, and we saw the Pope at Joint Base Andrews and how he reacts to children there. I think you're going to see even more here because there are about 200 of them here. But Scott, in Rome, you saw, in Vatican City, you saw what the Pope is like with children. Tell us about that, if you would.
Well, we had an opportunity to visit with the Pope at the Vatican's invitation at the Pope's General Assembly, which they have every Wednesday. 20, 30, 40,000 people come to see the Pope in the General Assembly. And you could tell, Chip, he had a special affection for the children in the group. He would be driving through in the Pope-mobile, and we're told he has a way of banging on the Pope-mobile to tell the driver to stop. And he gets off the Pope-mobile and greets children, greets the handicapped in particular, people that he sees in the crowd who he believes need a special blessing. And the Pope has also pulls out all the brides and grooms that have come for a blessing at the general audience, arrays them on the steps of St. Peter's Basilica, and really has a great time greeting all of those young Catholic families and posing for selfies. He's selfless in the age of the selfie as he goes through all of those people. And as Father Figueiredo was saying, the Pope is 78 years old, and he's greeting 40,000 people every Wednesday at the Vatican, and yet he goes through the entire process, hours, and seems to be invigorated by that. A remarkable man for a remarkable time. About 1,000 people were invited to come out to Andrews today to greet the Pope, and you can hear them chanting out there. Pope waving at the grandstand. The sounds of the honor guard as he approaches. As we mentioned, this is Francis's first trip to the United States in his life. It is going to be interesting to see what he makes of us. We had an opportunity to speak with him at the Vatican recently, and we asked him, what's your goal for your trip to America? And he raised his hands up and he said to meet the people, just to meet them. And he is certainly going to have a great opportunity to do that over the next several days. That was the Vatican a little over a week ago when we had an opportunity. He was keeping his cards close to the vest. We asked him if he was going to talk about the dispossessed or immigration when he spoke to the joint meeting of Congress. And he smiled broadly and lifted his hands again and said, I will speak to whatever the Holy Spirit guides me to speak to. And so we are going to have to wait until that meeting to hear what is on the mind of Francis. But here he is getting into, mind you, a very modest car, a small Fiat, not a big limousine, not anything any other head of state would be getting into, but this is something that he insists upon everywhere he goes and at the Vatican. He got rid of the Vatican limousine and rides around in a blue Ford Focus because he believes that the Pope should set the example of humility and living a modest life. So unusual in Washington to see a head of state driving away in such a modest little car. The ring of the fisherman on the Pope's outstretched hand, the symbol of the papacy.
How fast are Allegra gel caps?
What a nice surprise, fast.
Parties moved outside fast. For your toughest symptoms, non-drowsy Allegra provides noticeable relief in just 1 hour.
I'm not missing the hayride, fast.
Allegra gel caps. Not just fast, Allegra fast.
We've been changing things up with KY Love.
Oh, yeah.
It's a pleasure gel that magnifies both of our sensations.
It gives us chills in places we've never gotten chills before.
Yeah, it makes us feel like...
Dare to feel more with new KY Love. It's from Daddy.
I love you, baby girl.
Duracell Quantum lasts longer in 99% of devices, so you can always be there.
As the host of a popular home improvement show, I know a lot about finding a great contractor for home repairs and improvement projects. Now there's HomeAdvisor.com, a free service that matches your project to top local service professionals.
We didn't have to do any work other than say what we needed.
Just 1, 2, 3, I found my guy, and everything was smooth.
And it's always free to use.
We've had nothing but fabulous every single time.
Go to HomeAdvisor.com now to get started on your next project.
Why are you deleting these photos?
Because my teeth are yellow.
Why don't you use a whitening toothpaste?
I'm afraid it's bad for my teeth.
Try Crest 3D White.
Crest 3D White Diamond Strong Toothpaste and Rinse. Gently whiten and fortify weak spots. Used together for 2 times stronger enamel. Crest 3D White.
On any given day, anything can happen. That's the beauty of morning television.
This is your eye-opener to this day.
CBS This Morning, weekdays.
On CBS This Morning, we say the news is back in the morning, and we mean it. Those are not just empty words to us. That's just not a catchy phrase. We actually mean that, and we deliver on that.
We believe in the mission of telling the world what's happening and why. This is your eye-opener to this day.
CBS This Morning, weekdays.
Don Henley gained fame and fortune for his work with the legendary band The Eagles. Well, he's got a solo album dropping this week, the first in a decade. And he sat down with our own Anthony Mason for Sunday Morning.
Here, under the bald cypress trees of Caddo Lake in East Texas, a young Don Henley caught his first fish.
What'd you catch?
A bass.
Yeah?
Yeah, just small, you know, not a real big one, but it was exciting.
When you describe this area to people, how do you describe it?
You can't really describe it. You have to bring them here. I just tell them that it's a magical place and you've never seen anything like it.
After the past 2 years on tour with the Eagles and a lifetime on the road, the 68-year-old musician is spending more time back in that magical place near his hometown of Linden, Texas.
You were born and raised here.
Yeah, I was actually born 40 miles from here, but that's only because they had a clinic.
Take a picture of this.
His new solo album, called Cass County, in a nod to his native turf, is his first in 15 years.
The years went rushing by in the twinkling of an eye. The road with the changes.
After singing the Eagles material, some of which we've been singing for over 40 years now, I really need some other songs to sing. Even some of my solo stuff is 3 decades old now. So I want new songs to sing, and I have things inside of me that I need to get out.
When I stop dreaming.
Returning to his roots, he's joined by country stars like Dolly Parton and Martina McBride.
If you get burned, when you try to rekindle that old flame.
It's the kind of music he listened to growing up in Linden, with his father, an auto parts dealer, and his mom, a teacher.
So this was your first public appearance?
This stage was my first public appearance. Mrs. Robertson's kindergarten music class.
At Linden's old American Legion Hall, now a theater, we stopped to talk about Henley's musical career, which was launched in the high school band.
But I didn't start out playing drums. I started out, for some reason, on the trombone because they needed more trombonists.
How were you on the trombone?
Mediocre, at best.
Do you still play trombone occasionally?
No, I haven't touched the thing.
He switched to drums when he formed a group with some Linden friends. In 1968, the band had a chance encounter with a young singer named Kenny Rogers.
We were in a clothing store in Dallas, Texas on McKinney Avenue. It was called the Electric Rocking Horse. We were buying bell-bottom pants and Nehru jackets and stuff.
And Kenny Rogers was there?
He was there because there was a really beautiful girl working there.
Rogers agreed to produce the band's debut album in Los Angeles. That's where Henley would meet Glenn Frey, who was recording on the same label. Together, Frey and Henley would go off and join the backing band for Linda Ronstadt.
But you didn't want to be in that band, and you both knew it.
Well, we loved Linda, and we loved what she was doing musically, but we wanted our own band, especially Glenn. I mean, he really had a plan. He wanted to put a band together that had 4 guys in it who could all sing.
The Eagles, formed in 1971, would be the best-selling American band of the decade. And their greatest hits album, the best-selling record of all time. Their recent retrospective tour was built around a revealing documentary, History of the Eagles.
And when you saw it all out there, what did you think?
Well, I thought we struck a pretty good balance between the triumphant and the tawdry.
One of these nights.
The film includes some less than charitable comments about Henley by former record executive David Geffen, who signed the Eagles but later split with them in a nasty contract dispute.
He's a malcontent. He's always been a malcontent, and you know, that's just life.
Well, what did you think when you saw Geffen calling you a malcontent?
Well, I mean, that wasn't the first time. And, I just thought, yeah, that's so him.
And Henley was ready to leave it at that, almost.
Can I elaborate on the malcontent business?
Yeah, absolutely.
Glenn and I both, when we detect dishonesty and unfairness, we are malcontents, as we should be. And we smelled a rat pretty early on. So if that makes me a malcontent, then I'll own it.
The History Tour was a huge success for the Eagles, grossing more than $250 million.
So if the other guys want to do another tour, are you going to answer that call?
Probably. Because I think that we will eventually, in the next couple of years, actually come to the end of it.
Yeah.
So I don't want to be the one to call it off. I think Glenn will probably be the one to call off the Eagles thing. You know, I think it'll be his decision when it's time to stop. And I'm going to leave that to him.
Can you imagine it ending?
Yeah, I can. And I'll be okay with that. I mean, I don't really like the limelight. You know, I never have. But I have to sell this album.
No, thank you. I don't think so. I think I'm smelling a rat.
Resuming his own successful solo career has meant returning to Cass County, where he started a foundation to preserve Caddo Lake. And to Linden.
So you used to spend a lot of time at the movie theater, I imagine.
I did. I used to walk from my house to the movie theater.
Henley, who lives several hours away in Dallas with his wife and 3 children, bought the land the theater used to stand on.
And one night I came and I saw the blob.
The blob?
And then I had to walk home.
He also owns the barber shop and several other buildings.
So it feels like you own almost half the town.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they have an elected
there's one born every minute.
There's got to be some part of you that's trying to hold on to something here.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what it is. You know, there's that great quote from T.S. Eliot, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all of our exploring will be to return where we started and know the place for the first time." Some folks don't like working hard. Some folks don't like rain.
He bought those buildings to help his hometown. But this farmland, Henley says, he bought for himself and his family.
This is going to be my retirement place, I think.
It is?
Well, partly at least. Yeah, this is where I want to have the cornfield. And
after a life in the fast lane, Don Henley is finding his way home.
My big dream that I hope to accomplish in the next few years is to have a cornfield like my father had. That was my field of dreams when I was growing up. And you could lie on your back and look up through the tassels at the sky. I don't think I've ever had a sense of well-being to equal that.
I will take beauty into my own hands, where it belongs.